This is Rob Tobin for Boxing Social. Delighted to be joined here today by Eddie Hearn. We're at the O2 Arena after Sergio Garcia's unanimous decision victory over Ted Cheeseman. Eddie, how are you?
I'm alright, a bit surprised because I fancied Ted would win tonight. I thought it was a great performance from Sergio Garcia. Not sure what the one judge thought with 115, 114, but all three judges scored it the right way, and I thought it was a great performance from Sergio Garcia.
A lot of people, myself included, having watched some of Sergio Garcia, wasn't expecting that performance. You've just said yourself you were a bit shocked. Just how good of a performance was that from Sergio Garcia?
I thought it was a world-class performance against the guy who was fighting at British level. You know, I think Ted made bundles of mistakes tonight, but what he did show is unbelievable set of bollocks, and he didn't stop trying to win the fight. How many times have you seen a fighter who's miles behind in the 9th or 10th just sort of coast it out, hold on? He didn't want to hold, he didn't stop throwing punches, and he took much too many punches. You don't want to have too many fights like that. But what we found out tonight is that Ted Cheeseman tonight wasn't European or world level. He was British level, and it wasn't good enough. And you know, he's devastated, absolutely devastated, but he's 23 years old. He's still British champion. He's going to go out, defend that Lonsdale, and he'll improve so much from that tonight. I know he's probably not thinking that right now. But, you know, this is how you find out. This is the brutal sport, and it is a brutal sport. But that's how you find out if you're good enough. And he weren't.
Do you think there was an argument for potentially stopping the fight? When Ted was dropping his hands, it did get quite uncomfortable in there at times.
I don't think he was I think he was dropping his hands deliberately. Yeah. But it wasn't the best to watch. I thought maybe after the 9th or 10th round, I was starting to think, you know what, maybe we should look at pulling Ted out. But the problem is, Ted's as game as they come. And he didn't lose his power. But what was happening was, in the first minute and a half of the round, he was going for it, and he was having some success in the 10th, 11th, 12th. But then his tank would empty. I mean, how fit was Sergio Garcia? I mean, Ted Cheeseman is renowned for having the engine that will just overpower you and break you. Sergio Garcia's engine was unbelievable. He boxed off the back foot, he stood in the pocket and traded, he used his shoulder to slip the right hand. I mean, he boxed really, really well. And I spoke to the Maravilla promotions tonight in Spain, and they were like, I went, what do you think tonight? This was at 8 o'clock, or no, earlier, 6 o'clock. Oh, no, we'll win comfortably tonight. I'm like, yeah, right, mate. And he was right. And they obviously saw that. They saw something we didn't see. Don't get me wrong, I don't think that was the best Ted Cheeseman, but they obviously fancied it, and they were right.
Somebody we can expect to see on these shores again?
Possibly. I mean, look, the Fowler-Fitzgerald winner is a great fight. The Fowler-Fitzgerald fight is still a big fight with Cheeseman. It's just not quite as big as it could have been. But we keep talking about, you know, Fowler, Cheeseman, and like Sergio Garcia doesn't exist, like Fitzgerald doesn't exist. These are all 50-50 fights, really. You know? So Fowler's got to come through now on March 30th if he thinks he can fight a Garcia. But Fitzgerald's well in this fight.
It's something I spoke to Adam Smith about. I mean, we've seen in recent times Lewis Ritson against Patera. We've seen also Sam Eggington against Mohamed Mamoun. Does something need to be done to kind of have a look at potentially even where British level actually is in comparison to the rest of boxing? I mean, you've got guys, I mean, certainly Lewis Ritson's blowing through guys at British level, comes unstuck at European. Admittedly, Ted had only had one fight at British level. But do we kind of need to, as a kind of boxing country, really kind of need to reevaluate where British level actually might be?
Not really, because British level is British level, and European level is a level higher, or 2 levels higher, or 3 levels higher. That's how it is, and you never find out till you go there. Ritson, I don't think, had the best prep for that fight, personally, but Ted had a great prep for this fight. He just wasn't good enough. There's been plenty of other examples. I mean, don't forget that Sam Eggington won the European title. He lost it in a defence. So he showed that he was European class. But there's been loads and loads of fighters that have gone British, European, world. But the ones that aren't good enough. And it's not just a thing to say, well, should we look at the levels? No, they're just not good enough. That's the reality of sport. Ted Cheeseman was not good enough. When Sam Eggington boxed Mamoun, he wasn't good enough. When Ritson boxed Patera, he wasn't good enough. You know, but loads of other fighters that have gone on. When Martin Wald boxed Samir Ziani, I think his name was, at York Hall for the European title, he was good enough. But it just shows you that it doesn't matter how much hype I talk, we find out in the ring. But if we don't find out, the game would be boring, wouldn't it? You know, so it's like, should we put them in that level, or should we just keep them winning? Like, that ain't what it's all about. are you good enough? And as brutal as it sounds, we want the fighters that are good enough. So I want you to take those steps. It has to be at the right time, but I want to see how far we can take you. You know, and unless you make those jumps and clear those hurdles, we'll never know. Tonight we found out Ted Cheeseman is a very good British level fighter who isn't quite ready yet to pass the test at European level. But again, an easier European champion. He might have beat him tonight. He just fought a very good fight. I mean, was it that Garcia was brilliant, or was it that Cheeseman was poor? Both, in my opinion.
Other thing I spoke to Adam Smith about, he kind of admitted yesterday this card wasn't necessarily as strong as he would have liked. He initially wanted Joshua Buatsi to headline the card. As recently as George Groves, we've also seen Tony Bellew, David Hay, Kell Brooks coming to the end of his career, Amir Khan. We've kind of seen a lot of the stalwarts of pay-per-view boxing, or certainly the upper echelon boxing, retire. Now we've got young guys coming through. Are they ready to kind of fill that void? Do you think enough has necessarily been done to ease the transition from kind of 6-rounders to full 12 rounds?
Probably not, and I don't think you will ever do that perfectly. Okay. But at the same time, all the stuff that you're saying is stuff that fans would detest, basically. Keep him at that level. Let him stay at that level. You know, are you giving him enough 6 and 8 rounders? It's like they want it all now. So
I think from, sorry to interrupt, I think from that, what I mean is fights potentially lingering in not meaningless but 4 and 6 rounders, when potentially guys who are coming to win, who maybe not as dangerous, they could learn a little bit more from those kind of fights, as opposed to...
Yeah, I think it still comes down to if you're good enough. Okay. Like, look at Joshua Buatsi, right? I think there's a guy that you're going to see when he steps to European level. He's fighting for the British title. I believe he beats Liam Conroy. If he does, he goes, fights European level. I believe he breezes through European level. He's good enough. Do you know what I mean? If you're not good enough, you won't get through the level if you're ready or if you're not ready. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So all the stuff you're saying is right, but at the same time, you know, these guys, a good example is Charlie Edwards. Charlie Edwards is in a division that isn't particularly glamorous. There aren't many people to fight. He boxed Casemiro in his 9th fight or something like that and got schooled, quite honestly. He went away, he worked his nuts off, he come back, he got another shot at the world title, he won. So there's an example of where it does work. But every fighter that's had that step up at that moment, the ones that come through it are good enough. You know, it might be, I don't know, when you look at like standout wins, when Callum Smith beat Muhammadi for the European title, there was an example where there was a British champion who went to European level, knocked him out in a round. When Anthony Joshua stepped up to, you know, I suppose his step up was Dillian Whyte and then Charles Martin, he was good enough to go on. When Cal Yafai stepped up to fight Lewis Conception for the world title, he hadn't boxed anyone really at world level, and he schooled him and won the world title. So if you're good enough, it's not a problem. If you're not good enough, you may not be ready, but then you also may never be good enough. If that makes sense. So
it does make sense.
You could talk about it all day, but ultimately, the team will tell you. It's not a case of going to a fighter and going, right, you're fighting for the European title, and he goes, fucking hell, I'm not ready, and you go, tough shit, you're going in for it. You go to the team, very much like Sergio Garcia. Tony Sims and the team come to me and said, have you seen a European champion? We believe he's beatable. I watched him, I thought, I think Cheeseman can beat him. They said, make the fight. I made the fight, he wasn't good enough. That's sport, that's levels. But, you know, otherwise you get the home fighter winning all the time. You can't really win, because when that does happen, everyone goes, oh, fucking hell. And then when they lose, they go, oh, what'd you put him in for? He weren't ready. So, you know, but you never like to see your guys lose, but it's okay. It's okay, because you've got to try and make competitive fights. That was a competitive fight, and Ted Cheeseman lost.
You just mentioned Charlie Edwards. Headlines in his first defence of his WBC World Flyweight title against Angel Moreno on the 23rd.
Sergio Garcia's stablemate.
Is it?
Yes.
Interesting
Same
one.
team, yeah.
Just talk us through that card.
Really good card, I feel. I mean, world champion. I know there's like when are we going to see World Championship boxing on Sky? And obviously, March 23rd, we're doing it. Charlie Edwards' first defence against Moreno. Joshua Buatsi challenging for the British title against Conroy. Coley Chamberlain, which was, I think, sorry, Coley Camacho, which I think is weren't the best either. But I think that's a really interesting fight for the British Commonwealth title. Ritson back against Townend, which is a tough fight as well. That's March 23rd. Good card. And then obviously the week after we're in Liverpool for another big card. So there was, just going back to what you said about Adam Smith and was Cheeseman right to headline this card. I actually thought the atmosphere was good for the main event, and I thought it was a really good fight, very entertaining. And we're trying to find the ones that are going to replace the Bellews, the Hayes, the Khans, the Brooks, and those kind of guys. Ted Cheeseman showed he ain't there yet, and he will not headline again unless he fights Fowler, probably, or Fitzgerald for the British. But let's rebuild him. 3 or 4 months off, defend the British title, learn. I bet you next time he fights for the British title, he's like much, much improved. But who is ready? Josh Kelly, Joshua Buatsi, Fowler, Fitzgerald, all these guys. It's all there for them. They've just got to be good enough. These guys have got the best opportunity ever, but they've got to be good enough.
Just staying with Charlie Edwards, I've been fortunate enough to be speaking to Charlie Edwards quite a bit. It was a guest on the Boxing Social podcast.
I'm really pleased. I mean, he's really getting the respect now. Sorry to interrupt, but there's a great warmth towards Charlie Edwards, and I hope the fans come out and support him on March 23rd because he deserves it. And it's not just that his mum's not well, and that's part of the story, and the struggle is always part of the story. But the performance was fucking great, and he's the number 1 flyweight in the world right now. And we're back Charlie Magri days, and I, like I said, that card's full of great fights. But I hope people come out and support Charlie Edwards because I want to try and keep the prices nice and low to support those new guys coming through. Because we need the fans to get on the journey with them. A bit like tonight. Tried to keep the prices low and just say, come and experience these guys, find the ones you like, grow with them, and they will become stars. If Ted Cheeseman would have won tonight, by the way, we would have been back in the O2 headlining in, because you could feel, when Ritson boxed in Newcastle, it was mental. It was ready-made. But I just felt tonight before, during the announcements, you know what? Ted's got... We're getting some momentum here. Fortunately, we lost, as we did with Ritson. But that's life.
Something interesting that I saw at ringside today, completely unexpected. Josh Kelly and Conor Benn exchanged some words. So, Josh Kelly walked past Conor Benn. Words were exchanged. Conor Benn didn't hear him, got up, and then further words were exchanged, and they weren't very pleasant.
Yeah. Conor Benn came up to me and said, I want that fight. Get me that fight. I'm like, whoa. Just coming back from a hand injury. Josh Kelly has got so much experience in the ring through his amateur experience. Conor's just learning. But he's game as fuck and he wants to fight everyone. So, listen, down the line, Conor Benn, Josh Kelly, who knows? But, yeah, I didn't really expect that one. You're quite right. And I think he's, been brewing on Twitter. Conor Benn said something, a few interviews where, I want Josh Kelly. And Josh Kelly's like, come on in. And then it's just all good.
When's Josh Kelly boxing again?
Probably here, April 20th.
Let's move on to that card. Seems like a nice little segue. Dillian Whyte. Also, honourable mention to Fabio Wardley. Looked very good tonight. Dillian Whyte, his manager, was ringside, obviously watching that fight. Mentioned the fact that he's not going to be taking the AJ fight back here on April the 20th. Thoughts? Yeah,
there are some discussions about fighting AJ in May or June instead. I don't think that will happen. And I think he'll be back here April 20th at the O2. 3 guys on the hit list, particularly Brazil, which I think is the fight he'd prefer because of the mandatory WBC position. Povetkin, which I think is a fucking great fight. And Ortiz, which I think is a fucking great fight as well. Risky. He's backing himself here, having turned down the AJ fight, to go and have one of those fights to try and increase his value in one of those fights in the future, which I almost respect. It's quite crazy, but... we're building that fight. You've got Dave Allen against Lucas Brown, obviously, is a fight for that card as well. And a few other big things in the pipeline. I'd quite like to make Chisora against Joseph Parker for that card as well. So kind of like a heavyweight night. And we'll see where that goes over the next few days.
Randomly popped into my head, don't know why. Where does Michael Hunter fit into everything?
Well, we've got to give him a fight, actually. I like Hunter Takam, something like that. I'd like to do 4 or 5 big heavyweight fights on that card and just sort of build a big heavyweight night. I think we've seen with Dillian's numbers against Parker and Chisora, he's a solid pay-per-view performer. But all those 3 guys are really good, almost 50-50 fights. So, if he's prepared to go in every one of those guys, he has his own pay-per-view slot on April the 20th. and we'll see what happens.
Whyte versus Brazil seems to me, from the outside looking in, to be probably the more logical choice for Dillian Whyte, because it would afford him the WBC interim title or WBC interim position.
It's just the case of with Brazil, do you want to risk that when you're already mandatory? Do you know what I mean? It's quite you could just have an easy one and then just wait. If you gamble it against Whyte in UK, it's a great fight, but I think from a career point of view, that is the right fight for Dillian, but he's also up for the other two, which are big pay-per-view fights.
Does that fight have to happen here? Obviously, Dillian was over in America with Showtime. They did the deal for the Chisora rematch.
I mean, there's been no offers from Brazil, but I don't think there will be, because I don't think they necessarily think that's the right move for him. But Dillian has asked me to box here on April 20th, and that's what we'll do.
Does it mean AJ Miller? Is that kind of nailed on now?
It's certainly the front runner. I mean, there is, like I said, there is still the chance of AJ against Dillian in May or June. Obviously, the deal would have to change because he's turned down 3 of them. So, Miller right now, I saw sources say terms have been agreed. They haven't been agreed. There are very positive conversations. There is a chance that fight gets wrapped up next week, and we'll see.
Just finally, I've been meaning to ask you about this for a while. Gennady Golovkin, what's going on there?
Nothing. I mean, again, I've seen loads of different reports. I'm not going to talk too much on it because I think he deserves a bit more respect than that. And it's not really a case of signing Gennady Golovkin because, so it's a case of working alongside him. But the more important thing is to bring him to the DAZN platform for the major fights with Canelo Jacobs winner, maybe Andrade down the road and stuff like that. So he's certainly talking to everybody, and we're talking to him, and we'll see. I think it's the logical move, and but I can't tell you what he's going to do.
There's obviously been the talk about potentially Andrade versus Golovkin, but you've got the Andrade-Saunders mandatory situation.
So again, that had been reported. Golovkin against Andrade hasn't been negotiated, discussed. I mean, it might have been mentioned, as in you could fight him, and Andrade's name was in there, but not close, not being negotiated. Andrade is fighting Billy Joe Saunders next, happen around May time, and hopefully in the next week or so we'll reach a deal on that.
Gennady Golovkin versus Callum Smith?
Yeah, so it's a big fight. I mean, Callum is going to be looking for those flagship fights, probably return in May, maybe have a defence first, but they're the kind of fights he wants to be in.
Okay, well, Eddie Hearn wasted enough of your time this week. Thanks very much for speaking to Boxing Social. Look forward to catching up with you soon.
All right, see you later, mate.